Ladies and gentlemen, I'm incredibly excited to say that today we are putting together the brand new PC-centric personal rig for 2023. This is exciting. This is going to be a series where we're going to be cramming as much stuff as possible inside this box. Or maybe it's not this box. This is the Fractal Pop Mini. Could be crap. If it is, we're not using it. And granted, my requirements for this are very first world. We need 4K, 120Hz, variable refresh rate, and I want to be able to play the latest titles that come out, but this is actually for a living room PC, so I want it to be as small as possible, pretty much silent, so I want to be able to hear my sound system, not the sound of a load of fans. And I do want to go down the custom hardline water-cooled rig, so I can show this off, be a centerpiece, and people go, wow. And hopefully wow, because it looks good, not because wow. You've got that in your front room? So join me on what should be a pretty epic ride, where there be no problems with anything not working. My personal rigs always go to plan. Oh no! Oh, are you taking the piss?
Brilliant, our CPU is at 100 degrees.
You can join me on the heart-stopping adventure after a short word from this video's sponsor. Elgato's Stream Deck Plus is here, and it takes your gaming setup to a whole new level. Control lights, volume, color balance, stream settings, and a whole lot more, with 8 programmable LCD buttons, 4 clickable dials, and even an LCD touch bar. It can be as simple as a swap between headset and speakers, or controlling an entire streaming setup with just a single press. Learn more today with the link down below. Let us begin by actually mapping out my requirements and why I'm going for all of the parts that we are going for. Essentially, I actually play most of my games these days in the living room with a controller. I know it's bad, I don't do that with FPS or things, but honestly, after a hard day's work, sitting at the desk, standing here, messing around with computers, actually a lot of the time I just want to sort of sit back and relax. It pretty much depends on the game that I'm playing. If I'm playing like a first-person game or anything where mouse and keyboard is obviously important, then I'll swap to that. But fundamentally, I love to play Formula 1, I like to go back and play some of the older titles, pretty much any sort of third-person adventure game, anything like that. That's what I love to play. And I really want to play Cyberpunk again. I'm going to try it with a controller. If it's no good, then the whole idea is I want this to be portable. That's why I want it to be small. I want to be able to move this from the living room into a desk setup, I suppose, and then move it back when I need to play in the living room. That's the idea anyway. And obviously, while all of the internals are going to control the performance and allow us to get the frame rates that we actually require, actually it was the case that took the most amount of thinking and research. And I reached out to Fractal, who have sent me this, which is their Pop Mini Air. I always call it the Pop Air Mini, but it's not apparently. And this isn't the most expensive case in the world. You can find this for under £100, but it pretty much meets my requirements because it is as small as possible while still allowing very large graphics cards, allowing room for radiators, and we're not properly into the realm of ITX, because while there are plenty of good ITX cases, a lot of them are just a little bit too small for what I want. And I don't mind having something that's quite long, because this is going to tuck away in the corner. It's more the height for me, and this isn't really too bad. The main limitations are going to be with water cooling, because you can only fit 2 240 radiators in here, which might be a bit problematic when it comes to the hardline section, but I'm definitely up for the challenge. It also doesn't have the most high-end internals in the world. I don't think really you get anything in the way of, I won't have anything by the end of this video. We don't actually get USB-C as standard. There is an optional add-on, but there are still 2 USB 3s. Fine for what I'm going to use it for, just a couple of adapters. Nothing particularly crazy, but you don't even get cable grommets at the top or the bottom. This isn't something that particularly bothers me, but it goes to show that, as I said, it's not the most expensive chassis out there. But I'd like to think it does show to you guys that you don't have to spend ridiculous money on a chassis to get something that can end up looking absolutely immaculate and incredible. Let's have a look around the back, and this is just a scaled down Pop Air really. There's not too much to say about it. You can see it's got a very large gap down the bottom, which is going to be useful for me for stuffing cables and potentially any sort of fan controller boxes and things, but there's not really anything crazy here at all. You do get 3 RGB fans as standard though, which is nice, but you can see there's no hub for RGB or anything. I think they all sort of like daisy chain off of each other, which in this sort of chassis is going to be absolutely fine. But when we come to actually getting like a pump inside here and trying to do some things that are a little bit more advanced, shall we say, maybe we're going to run into some issues. But I'd like to think what we have here is a nice sort of bare bones structure we can make up and make it look very, very pretty. But of course, the question is, does it actually pass the GPU test? And before you guys say about compatibility with radiators and things at the front, because that's what I noticed straight away, if you wanted to put a 240 at the front, it's not going to work. Don't forget that as soon as we actually put a water block on this, we're actually going to lose a lot of this backplate. I mean, the PCB comes to about here, so you can see we're pretty much cutting off, what's that, about a fourth, a quarter, I suppose I should say, of the GPU. I haven't actually decided on blocks or anything yet. I'm probably going to go with EK because my experience with the Corsair ones has been not exactly seamless, so I definitely think it is time for a change. I probably should mention, by the way, the other option for chassis is pretty much this, which is the Asus Prime. And this doesn't actually come with a glass panel, which is a bit of a sad thing in my opinion, but it's already a lot better built. You can tell that it's just thicker metal. You've got mesh the whole way around, so in terms of airflow and things, this actually should have even better performance. But as I said, I want it to look good and ultimately taste good as well. Disclaimer, don't actually eat your PC. But the problem with this is actually going to be the power supply, because when I show you the front, in terms of water cooling, well, you can't put anything at the front because the power supply is behind this shroud. So it only leaves this space up top, which to be fair, you could put a 360 radiator up here and then use that for the GPU and the CPU. But then there's two problems with that. Firstly, you'd have to swap the power supply out for an SFX, which is going to be problematic when you're using a 4090. And then also the amount of power that's going to be called by a 360 rad isn't as good as two 240s. So I think this is definitely the preference if we can make it happen. But then again, it is ever so slightly bigger than the Asus, but it is shorter. If you're interested in this Asus Prime case though, and you want to see the full build, you can find that video in the top right corner of your screen. As I say, it was pretty neat. Let us press on though and discuss about some of the other internals, and we'll start with the elephant in the room, the RTX 4090. Why are we using this in the build? Isn't that ridiculously overkill? Isn't that a very spoilt thing to put in your rig? And the answer is yes, but the whole idea behind this rig is that it's going to be portable, and when Carl goes on holiday, and unfortunately does have to go on holiday, I did ask for him to never leave and work 24 hours a day, not even allowed a toilet break. For legal reasons, that's also a joke. Annoyingly, he resisted, so it does mean I am still going to have to do a fair amount of editing, and in this instance I want something that can actually crush 4K editing. If we move up to like 4K 60 or 8K, I do want to be ready. This also supports AV1 encode and decode, which could actually prove very useful. We've already started to do a little bit of AV1 testing and we're very impressed with what we see so far. So with all of that considered, and obviously the absolutely insane gaming performance that you can get from this, it does actually make sense to put in my new personal rig. I will also add though that this is one of the cheaper ones, cheaper definitely in air quotes. This is one from PNY, it's one of their Accelerate gaming cards, and as we tested, the thermals on this are very good, noise levels are also great, and it is not going to cost you as much as something like the, I don't know, the Aorus Master that might be bigger and even look a bit cooler, but in practical senses, it just doesn't really make any sense to spend this sort of money. Just go for one that's a bit more baseline. We'll put this aside and save it for ROM though, and actually move on to the Prime components. I say Prime, we're going the complete opposite. This is actually the most high-end micro ATX Ryzen board I could get my hands on. This one was given out by Asus. All of these components were supplied by the manufacturer. This is the Corsair X670E. And I do think that I'm going to end up doing a lot of testing with things like PCI Gen 5, not only for future graphics cards, but also SSDs. So I thought it'd be a good idea to actually be able to test that myself rather than have to build up a new rig every time I want to do some testing. Don't let it size for you though, because this actually is a pretty extreme motherboard. Not only can you put loads of power into the top of this, you've got great cooling to actually do overclocking and use this with the top-end Ryzen CPUs. You've got PCI Gen 5 for both graphics and storage. You've got one storage slot down the bottom here, and then you have this little M.2 card where you can put two inside here. Then you line this up with the motherboard and you click it in just like so, and yet you have loads of thermal headroom and cooling for running extreme SSD formations. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be using one single SSD. It's not even the fastest one out there. This is just below, I suppose, about PS5 speed, very similar, slightly less, probably about Xbox sort of speed, where it's 5,000 on the reads or just under, and then 4,000 reads. This is a 2 terabyte drive though, so this is going to be more than enough storage for what I need when it comes to gaming, and then for light editing as well, maybe store a terabyte or so of files and then use the rest from external storage like we do day to day. day. Here it is, our bare bones SSD, Phison controller, and you can see it is partly double-sided, so make sure you've got a storage cooling solution that does actually do double-sided, or you will need to use the heatsink that comes provided. Otherwise you could run into issues where you end up cooking an SSD like I've done before, because I'm stupid. Let's remove this top slot. Let's drop this into our slot. Make sure it's down nice and snug. Then return this to its native home. Moving on to memory, here we have some stuff from G.Skill. This is running at 6,000 megahertz. This is their Trident Z Neo. It's 32 gigabytes of the stuff. Because we do only have 2 slots, 64 probably would have made more sense, but I don't think I'm going to be doing enough editing with big enough files, and I'm using Resolve, not Premiere, but that's already makes too much difference. This is an RGB, which does annoy me. It hits my soul. But actually, when you put it next to our M.2 heatsink, you can see that the two now match pretty perfectly. So you could argue this was deliberate from the start, and this makes perfect sense. Let's line this up with a slot and give you that satisfying noise. Oh, who doesn't love a nice mechanical thud? It's just so beautiful. Now here's the bit that is a little bit more tricky, because I want to go for a Ryzen 9 X3D chip, but unfortunately they're not out yet. So what we're going to do is do our test build with this, a Ryzen 7700X, for 2 reasons. Firstly, I'm actually interested in whether I'm going to see bottlenecks at 4K with the 7700X. Honestly, I think we are, which is a bit of a shame, but as soon as we upgrade this to a 3D version at a later date, I think it'll pretty much iron out any potential CPU issues. I actually would be prepared to wager that in something like Warzone at 1440p, even the 3D version of these might still bottleneck at 4090. That will be an interesting test. But at 4K, I think a 3D version of this is going to be beautiful. And obviously, because this is an AM5 platform, we can upgrade this for potentially years to come, which is actually why I want to go for Ryzen rather than Intel, because this isn't something I want to keep taking apart. I really want something that's going to live loud, proud, looks beautiful, and I'm not going to have to be changing it around all of the time, because frankly, it gets boring. And case in point, I don't want to do it. My editing rig that I still use is X299, and that is pretty old now. And when it comes to gaming performance, that is way off the mark compared to what you can get from something like this. So this will be the full replacement really for the editing rig and the gaming rig that I'm using in the living room at the moment. I don't know, shall we get back to building this PC? Is this overhead camera satisfying, by the way, guys? This was a big investment, but I've got to admit, when we watch it back, it does make them a lot more interesting and engaging, especially with these new fancy Ryzen chips that actually look pretty cool on camera. Ta-da! And we're in. And speaking of in, let's get this in our chassis. I'm still offended for when people complained about me saying the word chassis and they didn't know what I was talking about. Like, come on, I know, what, like 38% of you are American, but there is nothing wrong with the way I say chassis, okay? I know it's a case or an enclosure, but no one says that. Chassis is just so much of a cooler word. It rolls off the tongue, it just sounds cool.
I'm sorry.
Apology accepted. Okay, so here is our first glimpse then of the rig. You can see that it is going to be a bit more of a difficult project actually. It's not going to be as bad as hardline RTX would be, but this is still going to be a little bit tricky. I mean, the thing that's already caught my eye is the clearance here at the top, because this thing sticks out and it is quite tall. So once we put a radiator in here at the top, we're either going to need low profile fans or low profile radiator or something. Because even if we use an offset radiator bracket, it's still not going to help us from the height. And obviously we could remove this and not worry about any extra SSDs, but that seems a bit silly. I want this to be upgradable, as I say, without having to take the whole thing apart. So when we do the hard line, we're going to need to make sure that we come in here, we go up into the radiator, or at least avoid this sort of area, so we can pull this out without any real effort or heartbreak. I can already tell this is going to be a really annoying build to do. Our next component is obviously going to be a temporary one, but this is a 240 AIO from Deepcool. This is the LS520, and coolers these days tend to typically be pretty good, but I like the ones that have some temperature regulation built in them, so they actually go off the fluid temperature rather than just relying on the CPU. Especially with current gen Ryzen, they tend to sort of aim to get between 85 and 95 degrees, which means that if you haven't tuned it properly and it's going off of the CPU temperature, then it can tend to overcompensate and sort of run loud all of the time, when in actual fact, if it was going off the fluid temp, it would sort of max out its capacity once the fluid gets hot rather than the CPU. But we do need to do a little test fit before we proceed, because our project could be over before it begins if this doesn't actually fit in. Let's remove the dust filter for a second. Well, we're going to need the adapter bracket because this doesn't actually fit in because the motherboard's quite chunky. I think that Fractal must have made some sort of mistake with this case, produced it and then sort of realized that they needed an offset bracket, because I don't really understand why there aren't more holes as standard. It just seems a bit silly. I mean, Fractal, if you're watching, please leave a comment and I will pin it so everyone knows what happened here. But this also was in the box, this extended radiator bracket, which essentially just sort of shifts it a little bit further out. It's just unnecessarily complicated, and it was my least favorite things about the larger sized pop, so it's a shame that it has reared its ugly head once again. If you had a smaller motherboard, you'd probably be all right, but don't blame the motherboard, come on. But once this is in, we are definitely going to run into a clearance issue with that M.2 module, which is pretty annoying. As I say, we could potentially look at low profile fans. Okay, so with the module removed, I think we can make it work. So the option is either going to be low profile fans and maybe even a low profile radiator, or we just don't use the M.2 module at all. Which is a bit of a tricky decision, isn't it? In case you're wondering what this bracket adapter actually does, by the way, it just screws in with 4 screws and then it essentially shifts this towards the back, so you can actually mount the radiator a little bit further away from the motherboard and thus get it to actually fit inside your case. So once I've lined this up, it just fits in the side panel, but it does give you that little bit more clearance on your RAM, or in our case, a Z2 module. Remember, of course, that this is just a proof of concept to make sure that everything is actually gonna be able to fit in our case when we move to water cooling. So it'd be a bit silly to put an air cooler in. Our end result is ultimately gonna be fairly similar in terms of volume of space. Oh, you know what I've done. You know what I've done. This is why I hate radiators. The power supply connection at the top. So let's take it out again and complain about small cases when he said he wants to go for a small case. At least it gives us an opportunity to talk about the power supply that Corsair have supplied. And this is actually called the 1000X Shift. And the reason it's called the Shift is actually, as such, I hope it's going to fit in this chassis. All of the connections are on the side, which is quite unusual. I must admit that I am quite skeptical about how many cases this is actually going to fit into, though. We have not seen something like this before, at least I certainly have not. The whole idea is that it's supposed to be easier to plug in, but I do have a feeling that there are going to be quite a few people that buy one of these, not really understand what it means, and then it turns up and it doesn't actually work with their system. But let's have a look. This will go in the bottom as so, or does it slide in through the bottom? I guess this has to be removed first. Hard drive caddy has to go as well. And then I think it will fit in. So there you go, look. And then it's a whole lot easier to actually get all of these connections. I can see the appeal. I'm just wondering if some of them are going to be a bit thick and protrude too much into the case. In fact, all of these connections are actually a lot smaller than they would be on a usual Corsair power supply. I think this is a new connection type. Yeah, Corsair Type 5 we're on now. But of course, if we plug into our CPU now, we can at least pull these cables through nice and flush, so our radiator will fit in. I confess things are getting a little bit messy now, but rest assured, I will tidy up, I promise. Now that that's fitted, we do need to actually screw this in and then reveal just how useful the shift is, or whether it's kind of worse because the cables are facing the wrong way. It's a fine line between genius and stupidity sometimes. As it is all changing, I'm doing some very basic cable management, but to be fair, to Corsair's credit, this does seem to actually be working quite well. There's more to be done, but I can see the advantage. It's just that this is a chassis where we've got so much space down the bottom, it would have actually been very easy if all of the cables were facing the normal way. But I guess if it works, it works. And if you don't have as much room to the back of your chassis, then actually I think this could be quite an elegant solution. But back to the previous problem at hand, the radiator. Let's try this, hopefully, one final time. Didn't I say that last time? To see whether this will now fit in without further issue. Looks good to me. Oh, let's try and plug this CPU connection in right at the top. Which one is it? I hate radiators! I mean, it probably would have been easier actually to put the pump head on first and then fit the radiator second. Probably what I'd recommend. Right, at least for now, I think we're good. I think we're good. And the next thing is going to be, how do we move these tubes out of the way when the graphics card goes in? Future me problem. Although that future me problem is actually now me problem. And then of course, here is our GPU. And this will fit. I'm very confident on that. It just might not be ideal right now. Right, that's in. I hope the USB 3 is still in, because that was wiggling around a second ago, so maybe I've broken that forever. Only time will tell. Radiator tubes, as suspected, are a bit upset. I mean, the only other option is to have the tubes going the other way. I don't think having the power cable for the GPU works at the bottom either. Take this back out again, look. And then being incredibly careful not to pull out that CPU cable at the top that was so hard to fit. I am going to try and give this a little twist. Easy does it. Easy does it. I know it's not going to look fantastic, but oh no, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's all right actually, isn't it? But it's the only way. We can't slide the radiator down that way like you usually would either, because for some reason they've not given you the ventilation at the top, which doesn't make sense to anybody really. Why would you do that? I think it's workable though. I am actually quite excited to get the water cooling stuff in-house and give this a go. Maybe we should try it with soft first and then do hard, because then at least we'd know if everything works. But let us do the final piece of the puzzle and actually plug this in. Again, I think this will look nicer once we've water cooled it, so we have a thinner card and you can do the cable down the bottom. Yeah, it's not great actually, is it? What about along the side? The issue here is just going to be getting it flush enough with the glass. As I say, we can always get the drill out and just sort of put a hole in down the bottom. That will probably work better when we're actually finished. But in the meantime, what do you make for our completely stock rig, the new Personal? I think this is going to do well. Bear in mind I'm using an RTX system at the moment for all of my gaming downstairs. Actually with AMD, I've been temporarily using the 7900X3D, not the XTX. Works brilliant for Formula 1, but as I say, I want to get into some serious ray tracing and things. So yeah, not too bad. Fair bit of cable management to do around the bottom. I think actually using the non-shifts power supplies would make more sense here, because this is just a bit ugly. I can always swap that out to something else. There's not too much cable management room and grommets and things, just these two up top. So if you are going to do loads of like Corsair fans or anything that has loads of hubs and things, be aware it is going to potentially be a bit more tricky to cable manage. But I do like the fact that there's this very nice big chunky gap here for any sort of adapters or anything like that. Overall, not too bad. I think this is a case that if you're willing to put the work in, you can make it look great, but be aware that in its stock configuration, this is what it looks like with minimal cable management work. Let's do the weirdest peel we've ever done. Grab ourselves a 4K monitor. This is 4K 120, so should be perfect for our testing actually, as it's going to replicate the much larger 65-inch LG OLED TV. Let's grab our PC-centric mouse mat. Link is down below at pccentric.store. A copy of Windows 11 on a USB flash drive, keyboard and mouse on the top so we can test that USB 3, and then let's give this a go. We've got RGB, looks pretty cool actually, but we've not got any fans spinning on the radiator at all, which is not good, so we're going to have to turn this off, I think. Maybe there's a hub or something that wasn't in the box that I was actually supposed to use and that I seem to have lost, which would be pretty annoying. Oh yes, I'm gonna blame Gareth, he helped me take apart the last rig. There's a SATA connection splitter thing missing. But I swear I had one. I swear I had a larger size. Oh, I think this is it. Oh, I think that's it. No, it's a different one. It's a different one. No. I did question why I would have two of the exact same coolers, but LT720, that is not the same. Maybe I can use the cable. Maybe it's the same. No, cables are different. Cables are different. This is peak sad. It's fine. It's been found. It had been put away in the wrong box of fans. Yeah, I know, Ajax. I'm happy too. But it still means we're going to fit it, and I think it's just going to be easier to take this radiator out and not start again, but plug everything into the top Now, then put the radiator back in and hope that it works. No! Ah! What was it I said at the start of this video? Personal rigs always tend to go a bit funky. Well, we've already done that and we've only just got started. Once we add some water into the mix, I'm sure things will get so much easier. Let's do this. Yes, we have RGB this time. We have RGB. I mean, that does look good. You can't argue that does look good. I mean, I don't like the tubes at the moment. I think there's too much tube to PC ratio. But other than that, I think it's a great looking system. There's plenty of RGB going on there, despite the fact that it is a bit more of a smaller form factor system. It actually doesn't look too bad. I think the graphics card probably looks a little bit too big. But the fact of the matter is it fits, and this is something that can be accommodated by this case, which a lot of micro RTX cases and a lot of cases that weren't brought out in the last year or so aren't really designed for such big GPUs. So it's nice to see a case that can take them. Oh, it's calmed down. HDMI 2, we're in. Here's our Ryzen 7700X. We've got 32 gig of RAM supported. It's going to be running at 4800 megahertz, so we'll have to enable Expo and get this changed. But for now, I think we just need to install Windows, and I will join you once we actually have some games and apps on this thing. We made it, didn't we? To say it was eventful would definitely be a bit of an understatement. I think all in all, I'm definitely happy with how it's turned out so far, actually. If I was going to use this as my personal rig, I would say I'd probably think that I'd gone for a case that was a little bit too small. But once we've made those adjustments and actually, I guess, brought it all together a little bit more, I think we'd be really, really happy. It's a little bit louder than I'd like in its default state as well. I think it's just the case fans need tuning a little bit more, so nothing particularly extreme there. I think we will be swapping these fans out for something a little bit more high-end, so all of the radiators and case fans are all tied in properly a little bit later. But for now, I think I'm very pleased with what we've got, and I'm very keen to test out performance. Before we do that though, we probably should put the side panel on and do the peel. Here we go. Ta-da! And Fractal didn't put the annoying glass sticker on the glass. They put it on the wrap, because they're sensible. NZXT. As for our video game test, we're going to start with Cyberpunk, as it is the most demanding, and we're going to set this to absolute max, because this is how I want to play it. That means ray tracing on Psycho. DLSS 3.0, still not here. Where is it? We'll probably set it to performance, because if I'm playing this on a TV, then it matters not quite as much, I suppose, exactly how sharp it is. Maybe change it to balanced when I'm playing on a monitor. But here we go. Let's have a look. Get our predictions in. RTX 4090. What can we get out of it? I think probably about 80 to 85 FPS without DLSS 3 at 4K. But we're aiming for 120. And actually, we're not that far off. There we go, around about 100 FPS to maybe about 110 depending on what we're doing in the game. That is not too shabby. This is so much better than when I played it originally. I think I played it at ultra wide, so it was lower resolution than this actually, but I was still only getting around about 80 frames a second or so. So you can definitely notice the difference, even if it's only 10 to 20% more FPS. It just feels a lot smoother. And especially in a game like this where you do sort of get into a lot of fights and things, it does make it a little bit easier. I'm not sure whether I'm actually willing to play this on the TV though and be stuck with a controller. I know it would be fine, but for me, I think I'd enjoy it more mouse and keyboard. But I don't know, let me know down in the comment section below. Did you play it like I did on a monitor and then have like a controller for all of your driving, or are you pure one way or the other? Taking a closer look though, I have noticed that we are actually bottlenecked, not by the graphics card, but by the CPU. This is exactly what I was hoping wouldn't happen, but clearly has with the 7700X. It's just not quite fast enough to keep up with the 4090. So this definitely goes to show that the X3D processor is going to be necessary, I think, for this rig to run properly flat out. Now, the next title that I wanted to test is something a little bit different, something we don't actually show on the channel very often, or ever really, which is Batman Arkham Knight, because I'm looking to play this game again. I've just finished, well, I say just finished, it was a year ago, just finished Asylum and City again. But the reason I wanted to show you guys and bring this one up is because when I originally played this on what was an RTX or GTX 980, we were able to get about 30 to 60 FPS, but there was actually a 30 FPS cap on the game when it launched, which is dreadful, but I wanted to play it, so I still played it. So I thought it'd be interesting to see how far we've come So I've unlocked the FPS with a small little change to the ini files, and you can see we are CPU bottlenecked here, not GPU bottlenecked, but we're getting slightly more than 30 FPS with around about 130 to 170 FPS. That is not too shabby whatsoever, and it still looks remarkably good. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to talk to you about thermals and noise, because something that puts me off recommending the RTX 3090 Ti, a lot of people can find them cheap at the moment used, but that card was really loud. It used loads of power and it just didn't seem to have the cooling to actually deal with it properly, at least the ones I tested anyway. Whereas this is currently running at, what's that, 55 degrees. I think the highest we've seen so far is about 62, and the PC is basically inaudible. It's only the case fan still that I can actually hear, which is remarkable. And it's not just the overhead camera that I've recently bought for the channel. I've pulled all of the stops out, spent loads of money on an £18 power meter to tell you exactly how much power this system uses. And at the moment it's using about 430 watts. So bearing in mind this GPU is actually rated for up to about 450, more if you're gonna overclock it and tweak it. That's actually pretty cool. So that's, I think a PlayStation 5 uses between 200, 250 or so. So obviously it's going to cost you more money, but then again, if you can afford an RTX 4090, then chances are you're not quite so fussed about that. Point being though, it's very efficient, it's cool, it's quiet, works nicely. Pressing swiftly on to our next title, we have this, Witcher 3 Enhanced Edition. And this is a very interesting title to test actually, because this is both cutting edge and old at the same time. This actually came out slightly later, I think, than Arkham Knight did, but as you can see, it's been enhanced with loads of ray tracing goodies. But we are getting quite a bit of stutter actually, and I'm not sure whether this is the ray tracing, the DLSS 3.0 frame generation, or maybe a little bit of both. It could just be that we needed a bit of time to sort of get into the game and get everything loaded into the shaders, or the shader preloading, all of that stuff. But I'm not 100% convinced actually, because if it's going to keep doing this stutter, if you look at the 1% lows, you see they drop every now and then. If it's going to keep doing that, that is going to be a nightmare. Let's go into the settings. This is running at 4K. Everything is cranked to max, other than DLSS that's set to balanced mode actually. Here you go, look, ray tracing, global illumination, reflection, shadows, everything. You'd think on an RTX 4090, you'd be able to run all of this stuff. Even NVIDIA Hairworks is turned on. But let's have a look and turn frame generation off, and we'll see if that makes much difference. Obviously the FPS is going to drop, so sure enough now we're getting about 70 frames a second or so. I mean, the game is absolutely gorgeous, there is no doubt about that. I just wish that it was a little bit more stable. I mean, we're still getting those drops like 30, 37 FPS. I don't really know how we can stop that. As I say, I'm not entirely sure what the problem is. We'll turn frame generation back on, but we will turn off Hairworks. See if that fixes our issue. But then again, Hairworks isn't new, so you just hope not. Keep an eye on those 1%. Is that going to make any real difference? It's looking good so far. Lowest we've dropped is 80. Come on, can we do it? Maybe it was Hairworks. No, there it is. There it is. Ugh. I'll probably play Batman first and come back to this after there's been an update that makes it a little bit more stable. Oh, look at that. I mean, have we crashed? No! For God's sake. Cutting edge technology. Now the game that I'm probably going to play the most on this is F122, and I want to show you the settings. I use NVIDIA DLSS, set it to quality mode. I will not be using frame generation because I don't want to add any extra latency whatsoever. And we're going to try the ultra high preset just to see how the game runs and how it looks. If it's over 120 FPS, that's fine, I will leave it, but otherwise we will turn things like ray tracing off, because in a multiplayer game, it doesn't really matter, does it? So here we go, in a very rainy Miami actually. And yeah, my starts are a bit basic, get over it. But you can tell the game looks absolutely incredible. If you do turn everything up to max, you are definitely going to get something that really does blow your mind. But as I say, it's more about the racing than anything else. And as we're only getting about 95, only getting 95 frames a second at 4K ray tracing, then you can see there's definitely more to be had. So I will be turning the settings down a little bit. I can see why they've added frame generation, because if you're a bit more of a casual player and you want all of the effects, then obviously it is going to allow that, but any multiplayer title, I don't think frame generation really makes sense. Oh dear, bit of contact there, sorry guys. Verstappen's in front of me, so you know what that means. I think it can wait actually, let's change the settings. We turn ray tracing reflections off, we keep shadows and ambient occlusion. And what difference has that made? Not really any. Oh, it's because we're CPU bottlenecked. Wow, okay, I didn't actually expect that. Really? We really that bottlenecked? Blimey. I guess, I mean, is that the ray tracing? Is that what's doing it? That is surprising. If we turn ray tracing off, does that actually help us out? Yes. Jeez, I didn't expect that. There you go, look. We're now back to a much more normal 180 FPS, but that is still bottlenecked by the CPU. We really need an X3D with these 4090s, don't we? That is quite something. I mean, what's our latency now? About 16 milliseconds. Just out of interest, what happens if we turn everything to max and then turn frame generation off? What will the latency be then for anyone interested? Our frame rate has obviously increased, but you can see the difference. Compared to 15, 16 milliseconds, that is massive. That is massive. Is it going to make me a better driver? Probably not. Oh, Carlos, what are you doing? I was talking to the camera. Chaos. Okay, one final game to test, something that I will be picking up once more as I actually stopped playing this when I realized the PC version was bugged. You were playing multiplayer and other cars were invisible, but that was a year ago, so that's long since fixed. And here we're going to go absolute max settings across the board. This is one of those titles that annoys me because you've got an extreme preset, but then you can go even higher. Right, and here we go. Are we going to hit the magical 120 FPS? Oh, it looks like it, you know. It looks like it. I was originally playing this on much lower settings on a 3080 Ti, and we were getting around about 90 to 100 FPS. So you can see there is quite a big difference. To be fair, this is with NVIDIA DLSS, but regardless, this is an absolutely jaw-droppingly beautiful game, and with true max settings, here you can see on a 4090, you are going to get the best out of your display. I might lower a couple of things just so we can get a minimum of 120, but regardless, this is an absolutely beautiful game. It's one I absolutely love to play, and it is highly recommended if you haven't already checked it out. But there you go, the PC-centric personal rig 2023. What do you make of my decisions? Do you think I'm mad? Do you think I'm onto something? And what sort of water cooling components shall we use? I haven't decided yet. As I say, I want to go with EK. I don't have a theme. I did black tubing before, so I'm probably not going to do that, even though it would look awesome. What fans shall I use? How shall I get around pumps and things? There's pretty much just a little bit of space at the front, so we're going to be a little bit limited, but it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. Do subscribe if you're not already to continue the journey, and if you want to see how I got on last year with that personal rig that was long, shall we say, you can find that video up in the top right corner of your screen, because it was quite something, but the end result really did look incredible, even if it never fully worked. Don't forget to absolutely smash the like button if you've enjoyed this video, and if you do want to check out current pricing on our PC-centric mouse mats or anything that's actually in this rig whatsoever, you can find everything linked down below with my Amazon affiliate links. And while you're down there, why not grab the brand new Elgato Stream Deck Plus? This awesome gadget makes your life so much easier, with customizable controls for pretty much any aspect of your gaming setup. I use mine to control Philips Hue, Nanoleaf, Elgato Studio Lights, PC lighting, and much, much more. Learn what you can do with the Stream Deck Plus today with the link down below. But thank you so much for watching this video. I'll catch you in the next one.